Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of The Federal. My name is Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Chandan Gowda, one of the finest scholars in India today, and a very, very prolific writer. Welcome to the show, Chandan. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Naved. It's a pleasure to be with you here again.
Yeah, lovely to talking. I think last time, a few months ago, we had a conversation, and
Yes.
it's good to be doing that again.
Thank you.
So, just to introduce you to, I mean, most of the viewers already know about a lot about you. But just a short summary about you, and then we proceed with the new book that is called Another India, which is a collection of your writings. We'll be talking about that. So Chandan, of course, is a very very prolific writer, editor, and translator. He's also someone who wears his scholarship very very lightly, and choosing instead to let it shine in his clear-eyed and very very lucid prose, as he does in this book.
Thank you.
It's a collection of his new writing. So he's of course Ramakrishna Hegde Chair Professor of Decentralization and Development at the Institute of Social and Economic Change in Bengaluru. He has edited this volume on Shiv Viswanathan essays. I think that was in 2016, isn't it, Chandan?
Yes.
Yeah, and
2016.
then you had that Gauri Lankesh Reader in 2018.
Yes.
Then followed by this this translation of a book of basically a book of autobiographical interviews with viewer Anantamurthy. And
Yes.
then I think last time we were talking about this book, another book of translations of yours, right?
Yes.
Along with Manu Chakrabarti, right?
Yes.
So this book, Chandan, I mean, it's my first question would be about this book, because at many levels, this is the idea itself appealed to me, and at a time when there's this debate on oneness and one way of thinking and one way of being, and and one nation and one election.
Yes.
This volume brings together your writings across various forms. There are different insightful essays on culture, on personalities, and very very interesting nuggets about cinema, the way things are, the way things were, and one comes so much informed and so much sort of reading this book. So could you talk about the process of putting this together in a way that sort of, because considering these were pieces written for Bangalore Mirror and Deccan Herald over the last few years. Um,
Yes.
how sort of you selected these to uh, number one brought to bring them together in a way that sort of gave them a coherent shape, and also to divide them under categories which give them a structure,
Thank you, Naved. That's a helpful way to begin the discussion on this book. Um, Modern culture uh, here, even elsewhere, uh, tends to train us to see things in a certain way, and which also means a lot of things that may be around us, close to us, might be present, but we're not able to tell what they are. Uh, and this is what, because, and this happens because of multiple reasons. One, modern culture doesn't feel that they're valued things. Second, they think they are things of the past and need not really stay around. And thirdly, there is some sense as it may be around now, but it'll surely not be there. So there's a sense of self-congratulation in modern culture about itself, and it's very clear what belongs and what doesn't belong. So and often it's embarrassed about something called tradition. Let's put it this way, whatever it sees as tradition. Now, and uh, and the fact that it works with binaries: modern, tradition, secular, religious, written, oral. Um, uh, yeah, there are all these sort of binaries with which it works, and it privileges the written over the oral. It privileges the
Yes.
modern over the traditional. It privileges the secular over the religious. And in a country like India, all of these domains are there together. They're working together in all the time. And one way of dealing with this is to be a modernizer and say, let's get rid of them.
Yes.
The other way, which I think, in academia and even elsewhere, people actually, writers often did not see these dichotomies. If you're a fiction writer, you work with a world where all of these are co-present, and the separation is not there. So there I was trying to say, look, the world of religion, the way you construe it as only a world of metaphysical thought, only a world where otherworldly thought happens, actually has a lot to offer in how we build things around. In a sense, if equality was important for modern society, uh, traditions have also thought about equality in their own way.
Right.
It may not be always satisfying. It may not always pass your parameters of equality. But the fact remains that they have also been bothered by inequality of various kinds. Even when you saw something that seems unequal, like gender relations, you will find it's easy for us now to look back and say, women's rights are important, women's freedom is important, and tradition didn't have space for that. Now, it would be a gross mischaracterization of tradition if you saw it this way, because you'll find lots of dissenting voices against practices that may seem to be unequal practices or to be unfair towards women or to certain communities. So this sense of discontentment or this sense of dissatisfaction or this sense of despair, uh, dissent, is a very valuable part of our heritage, because that gives a lineage to how a certain moral sensibility today that celebrates equality has come to be shaped. So, so I was trying to. That was one of my concerns. How do you become alert or 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 open your eyes? Begin to see such moments of traditions becoming uncomfortable about itself. And there are some of those episodes that I share in this book. Um, and and it's not just about offering a critique in an analytical fashion. It is
Yeah.
it's usually in the form of a narrative, in the form of a song. It's very richly elaborated. Right? We're not talking of cases of logical reasoning being present there as just pure logic. It's actually rooted through very rich imaginative exercises. So even as
True.
creative acts of dissent expression, they're very, very, very fascinating. In fact, they'll hold a mirror to the impoverished nature of our own criticisms today. We are also being critical, but the range and depth and breadth of the critical attitude today
Yeah.
quite doesn't quite match up to something that you run up to in the past. So there were all these things, concerns of mine. And also, another concern of mine is, this very common mistake that people in the modern world make, that they look at identities around them, community identities or identities of, religion, caste, language communities, regional communities, and simply project them back in time and see them as having existed in the same fashion all through time. So there is, and when you look into these texts, you realize that, that crystallized communities existing all through time will simply not, uh, you know, uh, reveal themselves to be, reveal itself to be true. There's a lot more amorphous, porous nature, and then it's really the so we're really talking about the world before 200 years, and even the world today, actually. In the Indian census, as like 10 years ago, I think about 200 communities were reporting themselves to be both Hindu and Muslim. On the, where are you on the religious, when asked what religion they belong to. So it tells you something about the complexity of how people view themselves and their relationship to there's something called community.
Right.
So imagine if that's the case today.
Mhm.
200 years ago, when we did not have censuses, we did not have these modern states,
Mhm.
methods of classifying people into belonging to this or that community, and this entire exercise of identity uh, giving and then fixing your experience along these modern state given categories did not exist. I mean, it's an extraordinary world. And how do you do this? I mean, you can do it in the way I'm trying to do now,
Mhm.
or you can try to show and just hope that the readers will walk away feeling a little different about their own sense of the past. And I preferred the second model, where I didn't try to really give you strict pointers on how do you view something like this, etc. I just was happy to share an image of a community interaction, an image of an episode, etc.
Right.
Just to again alert you to the livingness of social practices.
Yeah.
If people are deciding, thinking, acting based on everyday seem like large and settled. We have the joint family system, we have the dynasties, we have this and that, but everyday social life was full of vitality of a practical kind, people arriving at decisions, creative decisions, etc., that somehow our historians haven't still been able to convey to us adequately enough. um,
Yeah.
you know the sense of livedness of things. um, so yeah, so the so there was so to just to so I was trying to somehow do this.
Mhm.
Basically, Naved, what you started off by reminding us, this kind of monolith images
Yeah.
of society, of politics, of culture, etc. How do you now um, work against them? How do you substitute those images? One way is to do it by countering them explicitly, self-consciously, sort of tearing them down, taking them down. Another is to simply work quietly to substitute other images and hope that they're able to unsettle fixed notions of you know of how things existed. Because I feel the when you attack an object and the object actually acquires even more power than it had before, and it has other kinds of consequences, and that
Mhm.
kind of countering is required. I mean, it doesn't we don't often have the option of not offering counters, but the counters should take, in my view, a diversity of forms. And one method of doing that I thought was through these retellings of stories,
Yeah.
reconstructions of episodes, and occasionally offering criticism of an interpretive kind that you normally don't run into. Um, and I also have these sketches of individuals
Yes,
who
we'll come to that,
themselves
and
will come to. Sorry.
we'll come to that. But before that, Chandan, also it's very apt that the kind of piece that you begin the volume with, and you talk about how this absence of a kind of codified image to define Kannadigas, and
Yes.
in the way that that it perhaps it's a stereotype, of course, but it exists about other communities, say about Bong or Mallu, who could possibly be seen as maybe more sort of clannish, just a stereotype, and it's not my take on them or on the community, but just the way they are being seen or they are being defined. But no such image or no such perception exists about Kannadigas. And you quote this Karnataka state tourism motto, which says that one state, many worlds. And that
Yes.
is also sort of, to me, that also sort of defines this book, that it's one book, but there are many worlds in it.
Yes.
That it also
Yeah.
somewhere challenges the notion of a very singular kind of a mainstream narrative of India, and the fact that we are diverse, we are so many. So did this fact also have on your mind that how sort of kind of a subversion of that? I mean, you've spoken already about that, but how conscious were you while putting these pieces together?
Yeah, not very conscious. For me, I was concerned in a way, but,
Right.
in own interactions with, colleagues in different places. and also looking at interacting with people at large, well-meaning people, who are strongly committed to democracy, who are strongly committed to a certain idea of a plural India, etc. I also very was I was actually I would often notice that their modern imaginations had very little space for the things that had happened before, or the things that exist even now. That somehow they weren't. You can say I like diversity, I like pluralism as a value, but
Yeah.
your own imagination of the texture of pluralism, or your own sense for the texture of diversity may be very thin. And that's because, again, due to modern education, which gives you, which tells you, unity and diversity, which tells you all these things as good values to live by, but in itself is doing very little to give you a good grasp of, what does it mean uh, to, to to have communities which have their own mythic imaginations and their own sense of the world. And
Yes.
we want everyone's senses of the world to be accommodated, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, unless you yourself have some sense for what does it mean for a world to be different from
Yeah.
this community to that, you need to engage those imaginations a little. And it's really, and it's yeah, I mean, this is something that, I must say in a way, I mean, what I'm doing now is something that someone like Gandhi, for example, knew all along. For him to say that you need to live out the the religions of
Yes.
other communities around you. When he advises, if you read his reconstructing, the constructive program, something he wrote in the mid 40s, and his advice to the congressman is that you should embody within yourself all the religions of India. And what does it mean? I think it means getting a good sense for what constitutes the religious life for various communities. From a fairly minimalist approach to I celebrate the festivals, I have a good sense of what they're celebrating, to getting into their literature, their theological imaginations, their everyday practices, etc. Only then does your pluralism acquire depth, or acquire a solidity. Otherwise, it just becomes, um, you know, a value without a body. Um,
Right.
so yeah, so that was another concern of mine. I was trying to do many things in this exercise, including, uh, you know, uh, you know, we are in Bangalore, the capital of Karnataka, but the levels of ignorance about what constitutes Kannada society are so large. And there was some of that I wanted to, especially writing an English paper. So yeah, so here for readers to get a sense of, this is what this is part of this world you've chosen to live in. And there was that, and there was my interest in getting social scientists to wake up to certain things. And there was also my interest in certain activists to cultivate curiosities of a kind that their otherwise busy lives may not allow them to do
Right.
so. And also younger readers, etc. I really feel there is a lot of analysis in the public commentary, heavy analytical reasoning. And I felt often that readers sometimes require a respite from uh, being analytically led down the path of reasoning, and just
Yes.
offered a picture or an account that is only tacitly analytical.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just something for you to encounter and see what it does to your minds.
Right. Right. Now let's come to Chandan about these different personalities, and I think there's a section in the book, um, you know, which just focuses on your encounters with these figures in literature, in arts, in culture, in cinema, and you also dedicate the book to U.R. Ananthamurthy. Of course, you have written extensively about him, including translating one of his novellas, Bara,
Yeah.
in 2016, I think.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So and then you dedicate the book to D.R. Nagaraj, then Siddhalingaya, then there's this professor from UK, or is it an
Yeah,
American?
an
Lee,
anthropologist. Yes.
yeah, Schlesinger, right?
Yes.
So, if you could talk a little bit about what you owe, your intellectual debts to these figures, and of course there are stories about and aspects of on figures like Gandhi and Lohia, of course. You're working on I think a Lohia reader next. So if you could talk
Yeah.
about these figures and how they sort of informed your own sort of intellectual engagement with ideas.
Yes. Yes. In fact, the four persons you mentioned have been listed in the order in which I met them in the course of my life. So
Okay.
Ananthamurti was someone who taught my father, and he had come home, and I would meet him. Um, you know, as a Kannada writer who was skeptical of modernity, and who had a certain concern for how India has to become modern, but also has to somehow be attentive to its own philosophical, intellectual heritage in a critical fashion. Yeah. So, in not letting Western knowledges triumph all the time. Um, so that concern was with him, and of course, this concern worked itself out in different ways in the way he saw how literary value has to be thought of, to how uh, to let's say how does one fashion a critique of how does one be a critical insider. You try to you want to be critical of social practices, but then how do you do it? What are the means of which you critique? How can critique be effective, proper? Again, not in instrumentalist ways, but how do you do it in a way that shows your own grounding in that world which you're trying to revise and reform.
Right.
And D.R. Nagaraj was a Kannada's literary critic, again deeply concerned with third world intellectual predicaments and how does one be creative, while not simply relativizing the West as only powerful and or local or provincial. Actually, the dialoguing with the West, getting the best out of it, and trying to also fashion your own senses of critical reasoning based on your own very rich body of intellectual achievements across communities. Lower caste creativity was very important for them. Yes, the folk world was the quote unquote the folk world. Fortunately, when you use a phrase like the folk world, you try to put them in a certain space. But
Right.
the folk world is actually right now with us, and they're also inhabiting uh, the contemporary moment with us. And it is not at all the situation like when the Grimm brothers presented their fairy tales to Europe. It caught everyone by surprise. Even when you present fairy tales here, it won't catch many by surprise, because they're still living fairy folk tales, right? But the term folk puts them in that space of having been ossified and sort of dead, or not living rather. And that's an unfortunate tendency. I mean, unfortunate effect of using a term like folk. So that was DR, and Siddhalingaya was a poet and one of the founders of the Dalit movement. Again, a close friend of the family, like DR and Yoranathamurthy was. And so Siddhalingaya was a poet, but he's also very meditative. His later, his initial poetry was very uh, was hard hitting, and really changed the sort of rhythms within which protest was being expressed in Kannada poetry. And he built the movement. He was also an academic. He was a professor of Kannada literature at Bangalore University, but he had a deep interest in folk village deities, in folk religion again. Um, and so his rational interest in trying to expose religion as false or as illusions, like like Marxists tend to do, that religion is the opium of the people, that orientation. Even when he was doing it in his profiles of various village deities that he did for a newsletter that the progressive left movement of Karnataka was bringing out, you could still see there was an affection and fondness for the village deities, even as he was trying to show them to be a very much a this worldly affair, and there was nothing transcendental about any of that. But anyway, he himself moved away from that orientation to looking at them in a different way. And his autobiography, which was revolutionary in the sense of it's showing a certain kind of uh, an absence of anger or hatred or uh, or ill will or any kind of bitter sentiments uh, to the to the oppressive caste orders. So he was narrating events from his past, especially his childhood days. Those are the most important pages of that slim autobiography, without an extraordinary sense of noting wrong things, but not really, expressing, anger about them. There's was it a forgiveness? Or was it a certain kind of indifference to the stakes involved in caste hierarchy? It's many things. But there was a new tone that it struck, which caught the whole literary community by, you know, it engaged them in a very, it struck them by surprise. It was an achievement, really, a philosophical achievement. And so, sorry, and so, I mean, so and then Alish Kleshinger was an anthropologist of Maharashtra, but he lived in Annaba, I mean, where I did my PhD work. Lived there for almost 9 years. But he was as committed to arriving at an anthropology for India, of India, as anyone else I had met. And he was very, very careful about how you, and he was a big, he followed the writings and he was offering comments now and then. And yeah, so these four remarkable individuals who mattered to me hugely. And I write about three of them in the book. Lee, I've not written anything on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, this idea of creative dissent and some of these individuals, their body of work, it was very central to them, and it was very central to you, Anand Murthy, for instance, till his
Yes.
last breath. That he would not see himself as somebody who is just blindly towing a line, any line. So, and he was somebody who sort of also had his own, it's would forever, speak his mind, and he did that till he breathed his last. In the times that we're living in, Chandan, if you could talk about creative dissent and how the different ways that writers and thinkers and philosophers and artists have to find these different ways to sort of express ourselves.
Yes, it's a very important question, Naveed, because India is evolving. I mean, the availability of freedom, was never absolute at any point in time, but at this point in time, it seems to have really shrunk drastically.
Yeah.
Now, when this happens, it's difficult to arrive at formulas for how must one dissent or how can one dissent, because individuals work this question out differently in relation to where they are, in relation to their own temperaments and their own experiences and their own institutional location. A vast majority of Indians are simply unfree. I mean, they're in situations where the discussion of freedom of expression seems a big unaffordable luxury. Right? I mean, it's and there is no contract. There is no civil, sort of liberties being protected. In the large informal sector, which is the where is this? I mean, it's so I don't. So in that sense, um, I would like to sort of say that one can't have, I can't hand down prescriptions from above, from wherever I am, which I think is more privileged than a vast majority of Indians. But and we also know the institutional conditions under which, if you're a freelancing writer as opposed to an academic in a salaried setting, there are,
Yeah.
there is only so much you'll be able to do. Uh, but I feel people, intellectuals, artists, and a whole host of a whole thousands and lakhs of ordinary Indians in their own way are navigating this difficult terrain and trying to, quietly sometimes heroically, uh, try to not let certain things pass. And it's, I don't, again, I do not want to romanticize this too much, because, but I want to note it. I just want to note that, of course, the whole world of media, the electronic media world especially, seems to be a hugely upsetting. It's disappointing, and it's maddening to see how, it's that the discourse seems to be so heavily controlled in favor of the establishment, in favor of the government. But still, there are newspapers, and there are, a few, outlets here and there that manage to continue to do the good work. And I would like to be mindful of that. And yes, unfortunately, the way the system is set up, it's the elections are the more determining thing in terms of transfer of power, in terms of being able to give a chance to someone else to try to set things right. So yeah, and how that huge exercise is going to be managed next year is something, that I'm also, but and if you mean how can dissent contribute to the awakening of a critical sensibility, a critical moral, political sensibility, is an important question. But Siddhalinga's, one of his famous poems was, the chapter heading, to the ocean of struggle flow 100 rivers. So there are a variety of ways in which this happens, and I think uh, one must do what one can from where one is, and this is likely to be an extraordinarily varied situation. And yes, and I don't think one can have, uh, even when one might wish to, that this impulse to come out and fight on the streets. I mean, those are or struggle on the streets, or just protest on the streets, and they're all, well, they are important things to do. But I think one will need to creatively intervene in a variety of ways. I mean, that's one way of thinking of political dissent and political struggle. But there's a variety of ways, and they all are significant in their own ways. And so I think I would just allow, uh, you know, um, uh, yeah, in the sense of trying to, uh,
Yeah.
allowing space for people to be quietly, subversive, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you quietly keeping the good fight going. I think that I'm always, which is how it happens most of the time. Ordinary Indians being good in their own way,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
away from the glare of these, of these high visible arenas of discussion, and that you find on television. So I
Yeah.
and so in this regard, Naved, one of the challenges which I try to address in the book indirectly is
Right.
when the terms of discussion are polarized, when ideology has overwhelmed the terms of discussion now, but when you care for truthfulness, you care for certain higher values of democracy. Now, keeping these two together, how do you arrive at ways of articulating a worldview, of a sane world, of a habitable world? That's, I think, in ways that can touch people's hearts, even in this highly ideologized environments where people are taking sides before you have uttered two words, uh,
Yeah.
because they already know where this is headed, and So in such a situation, how do you make space for of expressing yourself and keeping both sides, even the closed minds, with you, and make them get a glimpse of what you may want to share, without anxieties of conversion. And you don't want to, some of the, a lot of our commentary, quite understandably, is driven by an impulse to, convert people onto the right side of things, the good side of things. And I feel I can understand why that impulse is present so heavily, but I feel one must not allow that to exhaust or to overdo or to be heavily present in everything you do from the start. And I feel there are other ways of proceeding that may also have to be explored.
Right. That's beautifully put. Chandan, one last question, and then we wind up. About two of your forthcoming projects. That's you're I think currently co-translating and editing both a short fiction anthology by Purnachandra Tejasvi, and I think that
Yes.
was also made into a movie, if I'm not wrong, right? Daredevil
Recently.
Mustafa. Yeah,
Yes. That.
recently.
Yes.
Right.
In fact, that's the title of my anthology too.
Right,
Developed.
and then that series in I think the Aleph series of the greatest Kannada short stories
Yes.
ever told. And
Yes.
if you could talk a bit about both, in fact, because it is
Yes.
one is curious to know the kind of stories that will figure in the anthology, considering it has great following the series has. The
Yes.
other languages, other I think regions translations have happened before. They have been
Yeah.
anthologized.
Yeah. Thank you, Navid. To start with the last book you mentioned, the Anthology of Great Kannada Short Stories,
Right.
people have chosen different logics to make their selections. In my
Mm-hmm.
case, I'm trying to choose stories that show a certain a novel manner in which a situation has been addressed. So if a non-Kannada reader was to pick it up, if he finds 25 stories in them, I would like that person to encounter ways of addressing a problem that he or she may not have encountered elsewhere. A problem, I don't mean a problem, but an issue, a phenomenon, a predicament, all of those things. So that's my, so because, if you're trying to contribute to a large conversation on humanistic imaginations in India that have responded to the modern predicament, it'll be good to show, what has been unique or what has been novel about how writers in this part of the world have tried to do in response. So that is my method of choosing a
Right.
story from among, 50 stories someone may have written. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, they must also be aesthetically satisfying. They must also pass muster on the criterion of literary value. It's not
Oh, I'm
just about.
sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's an ever present.
One is assured of that when it comes to you, so that is never a concern actually.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, yeah,
And then the Tejasvi is an extraordinary writer. He is a modernist writer inspired by Lohia, but who chose a very different path to articulate
yeah,
his fiction. And he lived in a coffee plantation that he owned, that he uh, uh,
yeah,
developed. I hate the word develop. That he
yeah.
cultivated in a small
Cultivated.
town called Mudigere, which is just which has many, there are Christians, there are Muslims, there are Hindus there in that town. So his world is very, very fascinating, because his fictional world, I mean, because it is coming out of an area that has many different faith communities, and so he has a way of uh, he has a way of making space for understanding his world. And Daredevil Mustafa, the film that's been made recently that you referred to, was an attempt.
Yeah.
I mean, the film actually has a lot of extra elements in it. I would just go to the story is the canvas is a different kind of a canvas,
Yeah.
but it's an attempt at trying to somehow encounter differences and somehow moving away from them, not overcoming. I mean, not letting them matter, no, as of living in the middle of difference. I think that's the sort of a stance that he arrives at. But no, extraordinary storyteller, and he's not. He was translated in the late 80s, early 90s once,
Okay.
and others. There are people who've translated him, but they're not very good. So
Mm-hmm.
this one has been in the making for a long time now. I've not been able to give it the kind of time it requires on a continuous basis.
Okay.
But I hope to be able to do that. And the last book is the Lohia Reader, that will also
Yes.
be of I think interest to readers. Again,
Okay.
someone as significant as the Ramana Lohia, you have 10 volumes, collected works,
Mm.
but you have an accessible selection of his writings. And
Right.
again, Lohia, because he was truly someone
Mm.
who was trying to who was interested in Marx and then encounters Gandhi and tries to
Yeah.
bring about a kind of fusion of the two.
Mm.
One of the most fascinating exercises, intellectual exercises and political exercises, that
Yeah.
is trying to both update Gandhi to the modern world and also take off some of the um, uh, non-applicable parts of Marxism in India. So
Right.
it's an interesting. Not I shouldn't. Interesting is too weak a word. I think it's an
Yeah.
extraordinary attempt at trying to. But I think looking back, you will notice that Lohia's
Mm.
relentless anti-congressism
Mm-hmm.
seems to have been excessive. His he
Okay.
was I think there is that side to him that I don't think is constructive. But
Okay.
but I don't even think he was an interesting political mind, and
Yeah.
uh, in terms of building an alternative on the political
Yeah. Yeah.
party
I meant
horizon.
only in that sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So that we'll need to see, because even those movements that took
Mm.
inspiration from Lohia, the Yadavs in the north, Lalu and
Mm.
Mulayam,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
as well the Janata Party here, they had their high points, and now they become whatever they've become, and it's less to do with ideology and more to do with the difficulties of Indian the political
Mm.
field, the way they have structured,
Yeah.
continue to constrain politics. But let's
Mm.
see, the OBC imagination,
Mm.
the reservation, the Mandal imagination,
Yes.
was definitely a contribution of it's an offshoot of the Lohia legacy, and yeah, and even land reform, women's equality, Lohia consistently, and the whole
Mm.
idea of decentralization,
Yeah.
and the idea of actually Lohia is not just an Indian. When he's thinking, he's also thinking of India's place in the world. So his idea of how world equality has to be envisioned is also
Mm.
interesting. So uh, definitely, I
Really
think
well.
and neglected, and unpardonably, I would think, by our intellectual circles. But let's see, the book may how will
We'll,
it go?
we'll look forward to all these three books. Thank you so much, Chandan. On that note, we'll end. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.